I'll call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. Madam Secretary, can I please have a roll call?
Mr. Betry? Ms. Bindum? Mr. Fell? Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins?
Here.
Mr. Otto?
Here.
Mr. Storr?
Present.
And Mr. Trail?
We do have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, sir.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes. I get a motion, second for approval of the minutes. Motion by Mr. Buttrey, seconded by Mr. Hopkins by about half of a word. Are there any changes? Typos? No. All right, well, let's do a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Those in favor say nay. The minutes are approved. We don't have any communications that I know of.
No, sir.
So we have continued public hearing, Plan Case 2250 T15, request by the zoning administrator to amend Article 2 and 5 of the zoning ordinance to establish definitions, use provisions, and possible conditional permissions for gaming halls. Mr. Marks. Looks like it's a one-man show tonight. Absolutely.
Okay, so based on the council's last meeting, or the commission's last meeting, my apologies, we made some changes to the proposed text amendment to address certain concerns that commission members had expressed regarding the proposed amendment. First, towards the definition of gaming hall, there were added criteria to the definition to give a more specific definition of when video gaming is used as a principal use versus as an accessory use. That criteria included the number of video game terminals relative to the customer seating capacity of the establishment, the square footage of space devoted to video gaming relative to the amount of space devoted to other activities, and the net revenue of food, beverage, and general merchandise compared to gaming revenue. That also exempted veterans establishments and fraternal establishments of organizations like the VFW or American Legion that have an organizational purpose other than video gaming or operating a tavern. Those are also consistent with the definition of those types of establishments under Illinois state law in the Video Gaming Act. In addition to that, we addressed the commission's concerns over permitted by right use in some of the districts versus permitted by conditional use permits. In the B4 Central Business and B4 East Central Business Extension Districts, which is mostly the central core business area of the city, it is made a conditional use instead of permitted by right. It still retains the permitted by right use in B3, which is consistently the most permissive commercial district in the city, and also the most insulated from mixed residential or university-related uses. Gaming hall would still be limited to strictly commercial zones, but just in a part of the district in which, or a part of the city in which there's been a lot of investment and careful attention, and adopted a special district plan to make it a more livable and commercial-oriented area. It's been applied a conditional use permit as opposed to permitted by right. And lastly, to address some of the commission concerns, we added distance restrictions. I want to apologize. In the amendment, there should be an adjustment towards the bottom where it says 500 feet from a pre-existing daycare facility. That should be 100 feet. So in the original amendment, we proposed a 100-foot setback requirement from schools or places of worship as required by Illinois state law. This adjustment in the location restriction adds daycares to that list. Additionally, we addressed a concern of the commission that there might be existing gaming halls with gaming as a principal use located right next to each other, operating as a consolidated area of multiple gaming terminals. We set a requirement of 100 feet separation between existing gaming halls. That's not a separation requirement between establishments that just have a video gaming license. It is a setback requirement, or is a separation requirement of establishments that have gaming as their principal use. So with those changes, the staff has recommended approval of the proposed text amendment. And as seen in Exhibit B, you will see the updated definition as well as the change in the table of uses. And the change in the location restriction as well.
Great. Any questions for Mr. Marks this time? Nope. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right, I'll remind everyone quickly of the procedures for public hearing. Staff has presented its case, and now those in favor of the proposed change to the ordinance can be heard. Those that not in favor of the proposed ordinance could be heard. Others may also be heard. City staff may then be allowed clarification or in response to new evidence. The proponents and opponents may rebut but can't introduce new evidence, and then may present a summary of the case. Then we'll close the public input portion and discuss the case and possibly vote on the case. So does anybody care to address the Plan Commission in favor of the ordinance? Does anyone care to address the Plan Commission in any other way in relation to the ordinance? All right. Well, thank you. In that case, I'll close the public input portion of the hearing and we'll go into discussion. Anybody have thoughts on the changes made by city staff? Or on the concept of gaming halls in general? Mr. Otto.
I think our regulations should discourage the proliferation of gaming halls. And so if anyone moves approval of the staff recommended language, I'll have a series of amendments, but there's no point in discussing them now. I'm not interested in changing zoning to make it easier for corporate interests to come in and take money out of the community. And that's what we're talking about.
Thank you. Any further thoughts or around that? No? Now, get clarification from city staff. Under the current state regulation and understanding of the way these things are approved currently, is there any requirement about whether gaming is a principal use or not?
No, sir.
So it could be an instance where the council and the mayor decide to increase the number of licenses, and they could award them to what essentially would be a gaming hall, but it wouldn't have a definition in the as such in the zoning ordinance.
So if the amendment is not adopted, or if
Correct.
if it
Under
if it
current
does-
under the
yes,
current.
under the current rules, yes, they could award more license, or create more licenses and award them to either bars, taverns, or what are essentially gaming halls.
And so what is the advantage of creating this special classification again?
It's mainly just to give us a chance to keep track of them and to permit them as a use, and to know going into it when they apply for their certificate of occupancy what their principal use is going to be.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Mr. Storr?
Thank you. 100 feet is not a very large distance. It's only the distance between here and basically the front door of the city building. So it's really not very much of a distance at all. And to locate a facility of that kind, of this kind, so close to a school, place of worship, or some other place that we might not like to have these, although I have to admit I kind of at a loss. How did the 100 feet distance come about?
Well, the 100 feet is the basis of where the state law indicates. They don't specify daycare centers, but they specify schools and places of worship. So are you talking about the separation from churches, schools, and daycares, or the separation from each other?
It's from the other
Okay.
different lane covers.
It's
they could use.
basically just at a basis of starting with I guess a conservative number on from the basis of state law, as well as addressing previous concerns from the last meeting about daycare centers being very similar to schools and churches. So it's a conservative number, but the basis is at least just keeping some separation, but giving the commission and the council have the ability to extend that if they decide otherwise. But
I think 100 feet is pretty minimal. It would scarcely be across a parking lot, and I think a much larger distance at least should be considered by the commission. 1,000 feet would be the distance from here to the entrance to the Urbana Hotel, historic Urbana Hotel, for example. So,
if I might scroll down on to Exhibit A, just one moment.
mm-hmm.
Or actually, this map shows the existence of all the gaming licenses, not just establishments that would qualify under the definition of gaming hall, but anyone's with gaming as an accessory use in proximity to daycares around the city, just to give an idea of location.
Anything further, Mr. Storr?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Any other thoughts or motions or further discussion? Mr. Trail?
I tend to agree with Mr. Storr that 100 feet sounds fairly minimal. Is there do we get into any issue with state law or anything else? Are we able to simply ban them if we want? Just
Well-
outright? Like my concern is, let's say we make it 1,000 feet, right? You start to cut out huge swaths of Urbana at that point, as I mean, is there a danger of reaching a point where we're de facto prohibiting them, and that would get us into legal trouble with the state or anything?
Other communities have taken steps to define it as a use or to regulate it further than what state law allows. Some communities have taken steps to outright prevent them from being established in their community. So it certainly is possible. The city's free to regulate it or establish regulation as it sees fit. Did that answer your question? Or?
And we would also be free to say that basically it would be perfectly possible for Vanna to have, to pass this in such a way that, say, you couldn't have these uses if they constituted more than 10% of the revenue of a business or something like that, that still would pose no legal issues.
I think when you get down to like 10%, that might pose a legal issue because it's possible that many existing bars are around that area of income from the or revenue from these machines.
In that instance, wouldn't they simply be forced to perhaps remove one or?
That is a possibility, although the licenses have been issued. So I don't think anything the commission does or council does in terms of zoning can remove existing licenses.
Right, but in terms of going forward.
Correct.
Because I happen to be in agreement with Mr. Otto. I think we ought to discourage this kind of things on a number of grounds. I mean, other than a little bit of short-term tax revenue, it hardly seems like a great thing to do, although I assume the fear is if we don't allow them to do it within the city limits, they'll just open up, outside the 1.5 mile limit, and, it's hard to see, other than basically taking a position where we're going to actively discourage them, what else we do, other than things like this.
Mr. Otto, go ahead.
I had one go ahead. Are we allowed to, through zoning, impose a restriction such as only one gaming license per individual or business entity, so that this doesn't simply become, because my thinking here is when they pass this in Springfield, as they always do with gambling, is there's going to be some social good. So 30 years ago, riverboats are going to create all this extra money for schools. And it doesn't. It creates extra money for big corporate interests who then fund the lobbying in Springfield. This is a variation on that. So the city gets 5%, Springfield gets 25%, the business interests get 25%. And so they said, this will keep the VFW halls open. That's a social good. But that's not what's going to happen with the direction that this is going. You're going to have a corporation that is very aggressive about marketing and is going to have these plunked all over town. And the money is not going to be what we were told at all, that it keeps marginal businesses open, the little mom and pop tavern. So can we, through a zoning regulation, say that licenses can only be held by one corporation or individual? They can only have one.
No, you cannot do that through the zoning, and I doubt that you could do it even, or that the city council could do it through the license ordinance.
Okay.
Mr. Hopkins?
So, assume for the moment we use the definition of a gaming hall that is proposed in the current version, which is more specific than it was 2 weeks ago. How would we accomplish the idea that video gambling machines in organizations, places that met those criteria could not exist in any zoning district? how do we actually accomplish what you told Mr. Trail we could do?
That doesn't necessarily accomplish what Mr. Trail asked about. It just simply, I think, provides a better identification for them, and at least it restricts it to the B3, B4, and B4E.
Yeah, I understand that. What I'm saying is, let's for the moment assume that I want to accomplish what Mr. Trail wants to accomplish. And that what we have available to us is the zoning ordinance. Because I don't see the subdivision ordinance as doing us any good on this. And what I mean by that is what we have available as a commission.
Yes, indeed.
And so I'm trying to imagine how you do this. And normally, the way a zoning ordinance works is you define uses, which we have done. We define something called a gaming hall. And then you identify the districts in which they can appear. All right? So what I'm imagining is we define this use, and then we indicate that it can appear in no district. This, in a language sense, accomplishes the purpose of prohibiting gaming halls, but not video machines in bars and taverns in the city of Urbana. But I have no idea whether, I mean, I'm the one who probably should know, but I don't know whether there's precedent for doing that.
I've never heard of such a thing. I would think maybe it might be safer to require a conditional use permit in all districts, and then it would be up to the applicant to prove that they're not going to be a social harm.
Mr. Guthrie?
That goes to the zoning board? Is that?
Yes, the zoning board.
Further discussion? Mr. Otto? You get your mic. Yeah.
Can one put a condition in zoning that stipulates that the gaming hall must be attended at all times?
What-
Because these terminals really don't require anyone present, so you could open them and essentially people are using their charge card or cash.
Technically, a gaming hall has to be serving liquor on the premise at the time, which always requires an employee to be someone capable of serving the alcohol as well, so that you would never see a game, be it for an accessory use or a principal use, you'd never see gaming machines being operated with no employee in attendance.
What you had described as happening is some of these have coolers.
Well,
And
yes,
so on. So, I mean, it would be possible for someone to have it there and lock the coolers so that they can save money. So if you've got several of these in close proximity, sort of have one person drifting back and forth and paying attention and cut your overhead by not even creating any jobs.
but I don't think that would be consistent with local and state law in terms of a liquor license being able to distribute liquor for consumption on the premise. I don't think that is that would not be consistent with because statute requires someone being able to serve that alcohol. So,
Mr. Hopkins?
So the way, so let's imagine another way to accomplish what we're at least thinking about. The city, meaning the council as opposed to the commission, could modify the liquor ordinance so as to not provide liquor licenses to gaming halls, meaning establishments meeting the criteria that are in the current proposal. Is that a way that
I
you can
think-
imagine this happening?
I think that could be possible, but that would be city code, and that's not zoning.
Not permitted.
Right, okay. So, I'm a commissioner, not a council member, but what I think I've heard is we can't come up with a way for the planning commission through the zoning ordinance to accomplish what some might want to accomplish, which seems to leave as a path the idea of forwarding this to the council with a recommendation against approval, with an attachment suggesting that the basis for that action by the commission is the intent not to enable gaming as a primary use. And that all we could do was hand that off to the council to do that through the liquor ordinance.
That's right.
All right. Any further discussion on Mr. Hopkins' idea?
I have a question. What does, we've already have one instance of a gaming hall in existence. Does that become a non-conforming use then, or what becomes of that? Thank you.
Yes, so since there's no definition currently, the zoning administrator goes by the use permissions of the use that's most closely associated with it. And it would, I think it would just continue to be under that situation.
Would that then be a non-conforming use, or what?
No.
Or would we kind of have to?
No, it would be allowed to continue, is my impression. Because
Yes.
the zoning administrators interpreted that the usage there is closest to a bowling alley or a pool hall permitted in the districts in which the licenses have currently been granted. And if the city council increased the number of licenses without doing something along the lines of amending the liquor ordinance, then more permits of that nature could be approved, which was kind of what I had asked city staff at the beginning. I want to make sure if we do nothing, and if the city doesn't take any action in regard to liquor licenses and with a gaming hall defined somehow with a primary use, can they still proliferate? They can. If the city council approves it, adds more licenses, then they apply and let, absent some kind of instructions in the liquor code, I think they can still proliferate. Mr. Otto.
If the current code requires it to be an accessory use, not a primary use, on what basis can the zoning administrator give someone the permit if they obviously don't have the infrastructure in place to sell more food and liquor than gaming? Why can't they simply say, you don't get an occupancy permit, we've got to see a kitchen here, we've got to see tables, we've got to see some evidence that you've got the capacity to sell more food, that's your primary purpose? Why does the zoning administrator yield and say, well, this is sort of like a bowling alley, so even though it's very clear your intent is not to be a restaurant or bar, you get the permit anyway? Why don't they just say, we don't have a category for a gaming hall, you can't do this?
The current zoning ordinance doesn't distinguish between principal or accessory use for video gaming, but also, as a point of information, all the existing video gaming licenses have been delegated to establishments that on their certificate of occupancy have been classified as either a tavern or restaurant. I put a pool hall or bowling alley as examples, but all the existing licenses are given to establishments that are either tavern or restaurant.
Except the one.
I'm sorry?
Except the one at Sunnycrest.
Which one is?
Oh, the hotspot. That was initially granted as, I believe, a restaurant.
Restaurant. That under the
Really?
yeah. So
I mean, is there no fraud implied if someone comes and says, I want a permit to build a restaurant, and they don't build a restaurant, and they put in a cooler and 5 video? I mean, that seems to me to be basis to say, you misrepresented the purpose of this business, your permits are pulled.
At the time they came to us, that was the only mechanism we had, and we knew they were going to be installing gaming machines. So they didn't misrepresent themselves, I think. It's just it was a failure of the zoning ordinance to have a use to put them under. So we had to default to the what's the closest use stance.
Yeah, and I think last time we talked about a scenario in which somebody has a restaurant and gets a video gaming license, and the restaurant part doesn't go, but the video gaming part goes, and in which case the principal use could shift just simply because of the nature of the business. Which doesn't mean that we should permit that sort of thing, but, you know. Mr. Trail.
Couple of things. Is that an argument for having 2 specific categories, 2 specific uses, different, one for primary and one for accessory use? Now you've got 2 separate, as long as you've got some clear way of saying you're this or that, and if you get an accessory license, but your performance is such that you've passed over into the definition of, primary, now you could get your license pulled. I don't know. There was an argument last time that, this sort of predominance thing, that you kind of have to look at each situation, but maybe is there some sort of brighter line that we could draw somehow? Actually, and I have a sort of legal construction question. A lot of this is because of the state statute that include the term gaming hall, right?
no,
They do not.
they do not.
How much of this, because it's being done in reaction to the state statute, where there are any other overlap, like I'm concerned the fact that it even says, contains the word video. Well, 2 years from now, they'll have some kind of gaming that doesn't include video at all. I mean, so is this too specific, or should we be, in essence, what we're trying to regulate here is gambling?
Well, the proposed ordinance amendment goes within the confines, or is within what state law defines right now, which is a very specific definition of what video gaming machines are, how they're allowed to operate, how they're
If the state
licensed.
law changes, does that by extension then change the zoning?
Potentially, but that depends on the likelihood of a change in state law.
Yes, the proposed definition has a reference to the state law.
Or, yeah.
So we are making, we're thinking about in terms of particular use, a particular thing that we're familiar with. But, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, nobody thought about video gaming. Video game, maybe slot machines, which I'm assuming are regulated under different laws in the state. So I'm just wondering if creating this new use, if we make it too specific, you'll get gaming stuff that doesn't fall within it if you're not careful, is my concern. Or that it becomes a malleable use that will actually more respond to changes in the state law than to our intentions by creating the use.
Well, our city attorneys do follow state laws So hopefully they would be able to warn us if the state law changed in a way that would negatively impact the city. I guess that's the advice I would give.
We seem to have gotten caught on the hop a little this time.
Right, and this law was passed, I think it was 2008 or so,
2009.
2009.
Yeah.
And these things are just popping up now as principal use.
Mr. Otto?
One way of addressing that issue, which I share your concern, because the only direction state law will change will to broaden and loosen. So rather than incorporating the state definition by reference, which would also mean that the definition here changes every time Springfield does, is we could simply pull the language out of 230 ILCS 40-5, that definition, and put the definition here and not reference the state law. And then the only way it could change is by action of local authorities, even if the state law broadened, which it will. That's the only way.
Or you could you could still reference the state law, but say this use is as of, the state law as of this date. Subsequent changes of the state law do not change it, unless we do so ourselves.
The language in the proposed definition doesn't act on state law as a crutch, but it's designed to be at least consistent with state law. Well, it makes a reference to state law. It still is able to stand in its own merit without direct reference to the state law.
So the fact that it continues to say video, if someone came out with a non-video gaming machine, which was legal under state law, would it fall under this use that you're creating?
The term video gaming terminal is a kind of an umbrella term to describe the machines that the legal machines that are allowed to that allow people to gamble. If you were to define a different sort of, if you were to come up with a scenario of a different sort of mechanism of a machine that allowed people to gamble, that potentially yes, but I know that video gaming terminal is designed to specifically address the common machines found throughout the state.
It seems to me like if the intent of the commission is to signal our majority or collective or even unanimous belief that we don't want to permit gaming halls as defined under the zoning ordinance, that attempts to fix the ordinance to put greater protection in it, or more space between, or more space between gaming halls and other uses, there's not a reason to go down that road. If our intent is to somehow allow them and put in enough protections so that we feel comfortable collectively recommending passage of these changes, then we can talk about that. But if that's not what we really want to do, then I don't see any point in trying to fix the ordinance if we're just going to vote it down anyway. Is that?
So you're saying, and if we think we can't come up with an ordinance that would accomplish what we want anyway, there's no sense in trying to modify this one?
I think that's kind of what Mr. Hopkins said a bit ago, and it's really because the zoning ordinance is not equipped to accomplish some of the sentiment that has been expressed here. It's not equipped to do it. Now, it would be equipped to allow them in certain zoning districts with certain restrictions. And if we want to go down that route, then let's keep working on the ordinance. But if not, I don't think we need to keep working on the ordinance. And Mr. Buttry, or go ahead, Mr. Trail. Yeah.
Last point, toward that, I think that largely that's true, but I sense, at least in my mind, I think in some other people's mind, that we have very different ideas about these as an accessory use within an established restaurant or whatever,
Yes.
where it's and to me, that's maybe the big lack of this, that those are not clearly separated uses that could clearly be regulated differently.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's actually what city staff is trying to accomplish here, in some sense. To set aside this thing where we clearly define what a primary use is, as opposed to an accessory use, that kind of how we thought that the state law would work. But this is in a permissive sense. It's not with the intent to not allow. Does that make sense? I mean, that's what this ordinance change is trying to do, I think. Mr. Buttrey?
I was just going to say that I think if we plan to forward this case with the recommendation to deny approval, I think it might be advantageous either way to discuss some suggested changes just to give City Council an understanding of what our thinking is concerning that. I understand, though, if others don't feel the same way, since that is kind of sending mixed signals.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, part of our record, as we talked in the billboard case and other cases, is to lay out as full of a record for the council as possible. So I'm not moving for cloture. I'm just saying. Mr. Storr?
Well, if we do vote this down, we're right back in the circumstance where we're already at, where we've got video gaming halls already in town, and they're getting a permit. And
That's correct.
And so, in a sense, if we vote this down, we're not making any, we're not discouraging the establishment of those. And that, or at least I don't think we are, and that concerns me.
The only thing that we would be doing is if we added language to the effect Mr. Hopkins suggested, is telling the council, we don't think these should be a permitted use, and we recommend that you change the video gaming ordinance to make it clear that it's not a permitted reason to have a license awarded.
Okay.
But it's true that if the council doesn't want to do that, then a gaming hall or someplace where gambling is a primary use can be approved under the ordinance as it's written, and in more zoning districts than what this ordinance is allowing. Mr. Hopkins?
Remind me, if we send something to the council, the recommendation against approval, the council has to have a supermajority, or is that not so in Illinois? I can't remember. To contradict
right.
the commission recommendation. Do we know? Again, these are things I
I
should
don't
know.
know, I got the zoning ordinance.
But
You know, off the top of my head, I don't believe they require a supermajority.
okay, that's sort of consistent with my recollection as well. I think the times it's come back, it's because they've tried to modify it, and it was argued that we had to hold a public hearing on the council amendment. Okay.
So really, the only value is in communication.
Well, there's,
Go ahead.
My sense is we're in a strategic situation. Mr. Butler's comment sort of reminded me of how complicated this strategy becomes.
Yeah.
If we inform the council, which in a sense we have already done by
By
the record
debate,
of our deliberations, about our concerns and about the possibility that the council could use the liquor license ordinance to not license gaming halls by the definition in here, they would still have to act on this ordinance amendment, regardless of the direction of our recommendation.
That's correct.
Yes.
And if they then approved it, so here's a downside risk scenario. They approve the ordinance and they don't change the liquor ordinance. Then, as Mr. Buttrey has pointed out, we end up with a worse ordinance than we might have gotten if we had also worked on getting this ordinance in the best shape we could get it in before sending it forward.
Fix it and then disapprove it is,
Yeah, you're getting the message, but that's why I say it's complicated. But if the council cannot amend it from the version we send forward, because if they amend it, then there has not been a public hearing held on the amendment that they vote on. So then they have to send it back to us. And we've been through this once, and it was, let's just say, not fun.
so the ordinance becomes
Um,
substantially different from the one we made a recommendation on in that
Yes,
scenario. Yeah.
yes. And the argument
Because they can
is-
obviously make amendments, but they can't change the nature of the thing.
They can make minor changes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, but if they make any fundamental changes, then they're amending the zoning ordinance without a
Without going
public
through
hearing.
Yeah, agreed.
Because we actually serve as providing the public hearing for their action as well as our action.
Yeah, I
So anyway, I'm thinking out loud, sorry.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair?
gotta make sure I'm getting, you're saying that even if we voted this down, on the assumption that the council might be so inclined to
Make
go
major
ahead,
changes.
well, that it behooves us to provide an ordinance in a framework that, if it were to be approved, we would find less objectionable than the one we currently see. And I tend to agree with that.
And I think this was Mr.
Yeah.
Buckley's point on that.
Well, I don't see how we can do that, but we'll discuss it some more. Mr. Otto?
According to 230 ILCS 4050, there's a provision in there on undue economic concentration, and they can do it with respect to not wanting to have a player be dominant in a market. There are restrictions limiting licenses to residents of Illinois. I think there's plenty of material here for our city attorney to go to work, and within the framework of things that are already in the Illinois law, we could perhaps even say that licensees have to be residents of Urbana. Not suggesting we do that, but it seems to me that I'm not satisfied enough work has been done on this to give us control, and I'm really unhappy with the notion that the idea of freestanding gambling halls is just a fait accompli, that we can't do anything about it. The original purpose of this, and I have not read this whole, I mean, this goes pages, and I'm not a
Yeah.
lawyer, I'm not competent to interpret the whole thing. But the purpose of this, as it was explained to the public, is to provide additional income to fraternal organizations, veterans organizations, and businesses to make them viable. And it seems to me that my current understanding is that we're going in a direction that simply says purpose of this is for some entrepreneur who has the cash resources to put up a string of video gambling halls. And they're going to have the resources to market that, to advertise in ways that the VFW probably is not.
Mr. Storr?
Well, to amplify your point, they already have. There was a huge billboard advertising the video gaming hall that we already have, right at the corner of Vine and Main Street, and one of the most prominent. My concern is that I think Ms. Tyler, Dr. Tyler, pointed out at the previous Plan Commission meeting is that they anticipate licenses being or applications for licenses, and that some action should be taken on this because of that. And so we're kind of under the gun if we want to do something. Otherwise, we're going to get more of what we're getting, which
Well-
is what we kind of have, I have a sense is that we don't want.
Well, we may not be able to do anything about that, but we can't unring that bell, and so the state statute sets out that these things can be awarded. The city council and mayor award them according to parts of the municipal code that we aren't in our purview. So some of the things that Mr. Otto just mentioned may they could very well improve the way this works, but it's not the Plan Commission can't do anything about it. It's not part of the zoning ordinance.
It seems like to me there are things we could do, or at least recommend. I really think something that more clearly delineates primary and accessory, so that you can. And I think also, for instance, if it's an accessory use, I think 100-foot or whatever separation between them is fine, because that would allow 2 adjoining restaurants to each have. But if we were going to create a separate category for primary use, I would want a much larger separation between them, because I would think from a policy standpoint, even if we were going to allow this type of use, we would want to prevent the creation of a gambling district where, someone could concentrate, a number of these businesses within an area where they could be built, that we would want to make sure that could not happen. That even if we were going to allow this use, we would want it to be fairly widely dispersed. So I think there are things that we can do and that we can recommend just as part of the zoning ordinance. We may not be able to accomplish everything we want to do, but I think there are things we could do in laying out a template that would maybe make it easier for the council to act.
I think about the only way to do that sort of a thing would be to, and we have never done anything like this since I've been on the commission. I don't know if it's ever been done before. Create a list of changes that we would like to see if we intended to pass it. And then vote either to pass it or not to pass it. But, we generally don't usually specifically amend things. We're not a legislative body. So I'm not exactly sure how that would work. In other words, strike this language and add this language, and strike this language and add this language.
We can do that.
We can do that. Sure we can. We haven't really done that, but we can. Yeah.
There is the question of whether we're the best equipped group to do that tonight.
Well, the
Before the
tonight
end
thing
of
is
that.
beside the point, and I would, if we're going to go down that road, I'd have to go back and look at it, certainly myself.
So let's begin to think about that. You could do it from two different directions. One would be working from where we are and sort of increasing the restrictions. Another would be to imagine the most restrictive zoning ordinance version that we could come up with and work back from there. And just because it's different and I don't want to get bored, I'm inclined to try the second. So the second would be to pick one use district, make gaming halls a special use in that district. All right, that would mean every gaming hall had to come to the commission.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, working back from there, we might allow them in more than one district as a special use. And we might put into the special use, there's a set of special use general language that applies to all special uses, as I recall, in the ordinance. But there are, in some cases, additions specific to certain uses added to the special use criteria. So we could add, for example, to the special use criteria, the kinds of somewhat discretionary criteria that are in the current version of the proposed ordinance. Because the question of, all right, is it simple to say it's an accessory use because it's less than 50% of income, or do we want to be able to say, well, it's sort of a combination of what portion of income, the nature of what else is provided there, whether there's food or just liquor, and so on. But we could do that under a special use permit.
Yes. I'm looking at the special use ordinance now. We can make recommendations, regulate the location, extent, and intensity of such uses, require adherence to an approved site plan, require screening, lot sizes, vehicular access, require conformance to health, safety, and sanitation, requirements as necessary, regulate signs and outdoor lighting, any other provisions deemed necessary to affect the purposes of this ordinance.
Which includes separation stuff, which I'm pretty sure is true in some special use categories, though I couldn't quote one right off the top of my head. Jeff might be able to.
So actually, we just added what you're talking about for special uses. We only have additional, like standard special uses for one use or one type of use. That's firearms stores and shooting ranges. Normally, conditional uses are the ones that have the specific criteria.
But
with
they go
the
to the ZBA,
yes.
not to the commission. So
Correct.
special use comes to the commission.
And some uses, like we've suggested, some uses have criteria in Article 5 for whether they're special or conditional or allowed by right. So that's kind of the largest, the catch-all place to put criteria for a specific use is Article 5, as we're suggesting.
So,
Yeah, okay.
so if we wanted to go down that route to use special rather than conditional,
Well, and
Or
in
either
all
way, yeah.
districts.
right, we could specify either in Article 7 or in the other article that defines gaming halls, on the specific conditions under which the special use could be granted. And we could get fairly specific in that. In other words, we would allow them as a special use, provided a series of criteria apply.
So, my suggestion is we send this back to staff. Suggest they make all three of the current districts special use. That is, all three of the permission districts. One is, as I recall, one is by right and two are by conditional. Make them all three special. And we have to define the use and the definition. We have a proposed definition of the use, which, although I don't have it in front of me, my recollection is that if it's defining a use that is always subject as a special use, that definition is good enough. That is, it identifies criteria and intent. So if we're not relying on an automated application of those criteria, I think it works. And I'm thinking that that ordinance, plus the record of our deliberations, perhaps highlighted as part of a motion, might be a reasonably robust strategy to send to the council.
I think it sounds like something that is worth pursuing. Do we want to elaborate any other, special versus conditional, I think, straw poll? Yeah.
No, it's got to be, from my point of view, it's got to be special.
I
That's
tend to
the
agree.
point, that's what I was
Yep, I
sort
agree.
of recognizing, that made a difference.
And I would rather it come to the Plan Commission than to the zoning board. Both, public hearing would be involved, which is important, but. Any other things that we want, specific things? We talked about define you think, once we make it a special use, the definition is robust enough that we can, it's good enough for a special use hearing?
That's my sense.
Yeah,
but
that's what
I
I'm
don't know
throwing
what other
out.
people think.
Do we want to ask them to do a little more work on that? Mr. Trail, you thought maybe it's,
If we make it a special use, do we need to enumerate the areas in which a special use would be judged?
You mean the areas?
you mean other than
Yeah.
these general ones?
Right.
I think we do, I think we
Well,
do.
we can, but what I'm imagining at the moment is that the definition is elaborate enough that it gives a lot of information about what the special use judgments would be. They're in the definition, and that plus the general special use criteria that are what, section 7?
Yeah.
Or section 5, I can't remember.
Yeah, 7-4.
Would be sufficient. The only thing I'm not sure of is whether we might need to redefine the distance numbers, because at the moment, the distance numbers are,
100.
well, but they are specific, so the question is, could they be longer or even shorter under a special use judgment? And my guess is that becomes complicated, so
Yeah.
I might be inclined to take those distance measures out and rely on the special use judgment.
State law.
Well,
Yeah.
state law would apply anyway.
Right, exactly,
So the only thing
exactly.
we'd be actually, this is a good point. The only thing we'd actually be taking out is the
Daycare.
daycare center one. And the only reason to take it out would be to be able to apply a larger number as a judgment in a special use and not be constrained by somebody pointing out that
Yeah.
number is already there.
Mr. Otto?
So how does this establish a record of what this board thinks? So in 10 years, if Plan Commission has an application and they're considering it, and those of us sitting here today really want to have the ability to get a big separation, but a future So if there's no numbers mentioned in there, is there any way to give direction to them what we were thinking at this time?
Well, that would be, as Jeff just said, as we did in the gun ordinance, which I think you were around for.
Yeah.
We actually added specific things to the special use criteria, so we could do that.
Okay.
And we might want to do that. My suggestion is if we want to do that, we should tell them now what we want them to add so that they can put it in a proposal that comes back to us.
Even if we do nothing more, I mean, I might not be able to say tonight, I think a specific thing should go on, but we have areas of concern that they could look at and see if there are things like, not creating a gaming district. How would we put something in there to accomplish that goal? I mean, I think we could certainly tell them what our concerns are, even if we don't have specific language or whatever.
Well, for example, a couple of things about the general special use provisions, first of all. It says the city council can impose additional conditions, not limited to those recommended by the planning commission, which it deems appropriate and necessary. So this is to a special use permit. And if there's a valid written protest, it requires a 2/3 majority of the council for approval. Those are a couple things. And now, example of what you were just talking about is what we did for the firearms store. So in the special use ordinance, we added things. That public notification is increased from 250 feet to 500 feet. Approval of the site security plan by the Urbana chief of police. Firearms can't be displayed in windows. We could, there could be something about the way advertising or signage is displayed. Hours of service is limited to 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. No individual underage, and I think actually the state law has already addresses that. I think it's 21. Is that right? For entry? Yeah, I saw. So that was probably taken care of. So anyway, that's an example of the kind of things that we could do. Now, regarding the issue of ownership, I don't know if there's anything we can do about that. I did look, the state law says you have to be an Illinois resident unless the business had been in Illinois for 48 months and operating in that space, and so that doesn't really address your concerns, I don't think.
The Urbana residency doesn't concern me, but in just perusing the law, what struck me is, looks to me like there's windows to put other sorts of restrictions. I'm more interested in the economic concentration. And
Sure.
that, if the original purpose of this was to bail out the VFW hall, they're not going to be able to compete with some corporation.
Somebody who's in the business,
Who
yeah.
is in the business.
Yeah.
And so we actually spiraled those downward, and the ostensible purpose of all of this was for
Nor would a
something else.
restaurant or
So it seems to
anything
me
else.
like we could have an economic concentration thing and say, use the state's definition and say no more than
Yeah.
1 or 2 or 3 or whatever by any one business entity, to make sure that these are in the hands of the sainted small business owner.
Do you know, Mr. Engstrom, if through a special use permit, we could attach some kind of condition related to how many special use permits a single entity could have for this purpose?
I don't believe that would be allowed, but we'll have to check with the legal staff.
That would, if you could do that, that would be most appreciated. Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Jeff, did I hear you correctly to say that some municipalities have banned the gaming halls altogether?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and the state ordinance does allow it.
How was that accomplished?
Through definitions similar to, some are quantitative, some are qualitative definitions similar to what we've described in our definition, but just through a simple process of defining it and stating what they did not want allowed within their confines.
Yeah, that would probably have to be in the the municipal code in the definition of an amusement device and a game room and, you know, all of that. They would define it as not to be, you know, somehow a game hall is designed, you know, is
In
defined.
some instances, it was done through their zoning code. But
Really?
Yeah.
Then,
If that's, yeah, okay.
yes, we can double check that
Yeah.
and, yep.
Other than kind of the way Mr. Hopkins described doing that, which is defining it and then not putting it anywhere in the table of uses, I wouldn't know how we could. Yeah, do your research, yeah, thank you. Do we have anything else that we want before we continue this? Mr. Butchie?
Is there any danger of gaming licenses being issued while this case is open?
Yeah, that is a possibility, yes.
The law is what it is at the current time, and so the council and the mayor will do what they do. So, Mr. Otto?
I mean, but they do have to expand the number of liquor licenses. So if they
Correct.
do, it's not a case where the administrator can simply decide to do it. And so that would be sending a pretty clear signal on the council's part that they
Yes.
want to more aggressively have these. And they're ultimately responsible to the voters, not
Right,
us.
exactly, yeah. And did anybody else? No? Are we good? As good as we can be? Mr. Hopkins, one more point?
Each liquor license is a substantive decision by the mayor, am I correct?
Right, it's liquor license and gaming license.
So two
It-
different.
And- and the-
But the mayor has discretion.
Correct, and
So-
they're
So the mayor
approving.
could decide, even though there's an application that appears to be a gaming hall, and there's an additional liquor license because the council has acted, the mayor doesn't have to give it to a gaming hall.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, we'll continue this, then, hearing no objection, until the next regularly scheduled meeting. Thank you. Don't have any old business, don't have any new public hearings. We do have a case of new business, plan case number CCZBA 791 AT 14, a request by the county zoning administrator to amend the county zoning ordinance regarding heliport restricted landing area.
So last year, the Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals adopted an amendment that established standard conditions for special use permits related to heliports and restricted landing areas for aircraft and helicopters within the unincorporated parts of the county. It deemed that heliports and restricted landing areas, RLAs, would need to be buffered from dwellings that were under separate ownership and land that was reserved or zoned as conservation or recreation. It defined, as you will observe, towards the end, special buffers within those areas of 250 feet from nearest property under different ownership, or 1,320 feet from nearest dwelling under different ownership. This was done in response to a special use permit which was denied in part of the county. So this was adopted as additional restrictions by the Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals. They put into the ordinance language an expiration after 1 year to consider the effects of the ordinance as well. And it is the expiration of that amendment is coming forward this spring, and So the Zoning Board of Appeals is considering a new amendment to make those changes permanent. The differences between the legislation that was passed this year and the changes that they're looking to make permanent are just some minor differences that remove the language of making it 1 year, as well as clarifying some of the language, separating it from their special use permit exceptions and of the distance requirements from those districts. So with that consideration of future expansion of the city towards the city moving into incorporating or annexing future areas possibly even affected by this, the city does not have any current restricted landing areas or heliports within city limits at the moment. So this wouldn't affect any current parts of the city, but this is a consideration that the staff recommends the Plan Commission adopt defeat a resolution of protest for the proposed county zoning ordinance text amendment.
So there are no substantive differences between, no real substantive differences between this ordinance and the one that we considered that it was the temporary 1 year?
No
several
major
months ago?
substantive differences, no.
Right, okay. Is the top of Carl not considered a heliport? I'm just curious. It doesn't have anything to do with this ordinance.
No, I don't think it's considered a heliport. I think it's just considered a.
I'm sure it's
and
properly regulated and everything is fine.
Yes, it's accessory to the hospital.
Right.
Heliport and restricted landing area are special definitions defined by
stuff.
federal law. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Marks? Mr. Trail?
Just maybe for my own future, can you explain to me why the language of the resolution looks like it does?
couldn't figure that out last
Defeat
time.
a resolution
Oh,
of protest?
Now that is the old double negative. So
Yeah, I'm just curious
Yeah.
why it looks that way. Because honestly, just
maybe Jeff can.
you recommend to
or
defeat
Mr.
a
Marks,
resolution.
yeah.
I don't even know what that
What
means.
you're doing, yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically the city has a right to protest the zoning change in the county. So we drafted up just in case a plan commission wants to protest it. And we recommend you defeat it because we don't think it would be in the city's interests to protest, if that helps.
So, in essence, the only action we could take at this point would be to protest to the county that we don't want you to do this.
Yeah, recommend that.
And there is
essentially,
a straw man resolution to that effect that you're
Sure.
suggesting
Yes.
that we defeat. Okay.
If we don't like this, we would recommend to adopt a resolution of protest. If we don't have a problem, then we're going to defeat. So yeah, this is the double negative that's hard to get your head around when you. Yeah. Okay. Further questions or discussions on this? Mr. Storr?
Are there any restrictions to use of this for time of day or frequency of use? Whether this would apply to drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, noise?
The issue of drones is one that's a different matter. The FAA is just getting around to even addressing that. This doesn't really affect this considers more spatial requirements as opposed to temporal ones.
Does this only applies to helicopters, but not to other types of aircraft? Is that correct?
Well, it refers to the two defined landing areas for an aircraft by the FAA, which is they distinguish a heliport, and then they distinguish a restricted landing area, which almost always means an airplane. And so the policy is based off those two defined parts of federal law.
Any further questions, Mr. Trail?
Not to go into any kind of detail at all, but what was the nature of the original request that was denied that this is in response to? I mean, what are people wanting to do out there that this is in response to?
I'm trying to remember. It's been a while. I can't recall. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Something happened that somebody didn't like, and
Someone wanted their own private landing
some
field, or?
some such. I don't know.
Have to do with, up on North Cunningham, Frasco?
No, it's not Frasca. It's out in a different township.
Southern part of the county.
Is this the one where they had the subdivision that was around the landing strip, and then some people moved in and protested the use of the landing strip?
It could have been, yeah.
Anything further?
You want a motion?
I would like a motion, Mr. Otto.
I
That would be-
move that we recommend to defeat a resolution of protest on, what, CCZBA case number 791-AT-14? Is that the appropriate wording?
Yes, it is. Very well done. Moved by Mr. Otto, seconded by Mr. Hopkins. And roll call when you're ready.
Is this, are we
Oh,
done?
if you have something else to discuss, please.
Okay, because of this double negative and so, and so forth, what would our vote actually amount to in this case if we voted yes, we're
You're voting yes to defeat a resolution of protest. So you're
Yes.
basically saying this becomes law and Urbana does not object to it.
thank you.
Yeah, it's the double negative. It confused the heck out of me for about 5 years. So, all right. Please, roll call,
Mr.
please.
Fitch?
Yes. I almost voted the wrong way.
Mr. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Mr. Storr?
Yes.
Mr. Trail? Yes. And Mr. Betry?
That motion passes, and I presume that'll go to the city council at the next
Yes.
available opportunity.
March 2nd.
Okay, thank you. Doesn't look like we have any audience participation. Do we have a staff report?
Oh, no report tonight.
No report tonight. We have no study session, and therefore, we're adjourned.